exclusively at our Frecker Drive location. Marie's Mini Mart with 25 locations. Wherever you go, there we are.
Hello, I'm Karl Wells. To say that today's guest is multi-talented is an understatement. He's one of Canada's foremost visual artists in pen and ink drawing. He is a poet with 8 published volumes to his credit. He's also a musician who has at least 3 recordings on the market. So yes, he's a very talented man, and I'm very happy that he was able to take the time to be with us today on the program. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Boyd Chubbs.
Thank you, Karl.
It's great to see you again, Boyd.
You too.
Now, you are from Lantziclair, Strait of Belle Isle, Labrador.
Yes.
And there's a story connected with, you were born in 1955.
Yes.
But you were almost born on the Atlantic Ocean in boat. Tell that story.
In a massive storm. Well, in 1955, the government started work on the road. So from Lantziclair to Forto be the first part of it. So that summer, all the fishing people went working on the road, like you would. Except for 2 men. They had either bad backs or something. So mother went into labor with me. But there was a massive southwest storm, massive. But they got her in the boat, managed to get her around the reef. How they did it, nobody knows, really. But everyone survived. But I know that's where the water comes from for me. Absolutely.
You have said many times, I think, that you had a magnificent childhood.
Yes.
Why was it magnificent?
A wonderment. Wonderment. Grew up with huskies. Grew up certainly fishing. And then the berry grounds, the cliffs, winter with the different snows and the crush and the silence, except for dogs passing things around. I put all of that in a poem one time called Beneath the Dust and Stars. So lying on my back on Christmas Eve with the stars on your shoulders, you know, and except for huskies or the crunch of snow, or people going to church, where I would have to go as well, mother being the organist. Just lying there and taking all of that in. It was a distillation of all of the imagery that has, to this day, sustained me. It was a remarkable way to grow up. And then strangers started to come. In 1966, Smallwood declared come home year. So there was a ferry boat on the Straits of Belle Isle. So I was 9 years old. I could still see this dust-covered Volkswagen down on the wharf. And whenever there was a stranger, I ran to them every time. I went down to the wharf, and there was a man with a nice white beard, although he wasn't old, playing guitar. But he wasn't doing this to the guitar like most people were home. He was doing this, playing sounds I had never heard. And I ran back up and I said to mother, I said, can he come up to the house? And there was a lady with him. She said, there's plenty of food, sure. It's summertime. And he did. And it's those kinds of things which emphasize everything that instinctively I knew, but consciously didn't know, that I grew up in absolute wonderment. and still I am.
So it was the images, the sounds, and even the, I guess, the aromas of summertime.
And the berry grounds, you know, going, because you had to pick berries. You had to have jam. You had to have a garden, you know. People had to hunt, fish. And all of those things, of course, to me were pure drama.
Your dad, Gordon, was a fisherman.
Yes.
Now, I'm assuming, like most Outport children whose dads are fishermen, you would have spent quite a bit of time out in boat with him.
Yes, and the brothers. And with father was, he became, without planning, sort of a scribe. When government literature first came into the mail, there was a lot still of illiteracy. And somehow father started to be this scribe, the scrivener, this liaison, writing letters, answering letters,
For people.
doing income tax for the people. And he did it, and without fuss, without saying. And then in Fortle, there was Mr. Will Hancock. In Lancelot, there was Mr. O'Brien. The people that did this without consciously saying it. Incredible stuff.
Yeah, it is incredible, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. I know a lady in Gambo who was doing people's income tax right up through her 90s.
There you go.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Father did too. He was out by 5 cents one time. Which sort of hurt him a bit.
Yeah, yeah. If you're out by 5 cents, that's too much. Speaking of your father, Gordon, in 1985, you went back to L'Anse-aux-Clercs and spent a year there.
Yes.
Much of it spent alone with your father, out in the woods with the buck saw and the axe.
Gorgeous time.
Wonderful memories for you, I imagine.
Yeah, father loved a good wood pile. And that year we had 2 magnificent wood piles. And like boys that we were and are and always will be, we would stand back after all the wood was put up and do that, and then look at each other and grin. And in the woods, and then of course father was a pipe smoker, so you get that smell as well, right? Then little breaks, and you look around at the woods and the snow, and you see a partridge, and you think, this is it. This is it. Plus, of course, the absolute necessity of surviving, of having and gathering. You know, it's gatherers, you know, to keep warm, to have shelter, and all of that. And with father, who was still in pretty good form in those days. A couple times mother went in with us, the church organist, and but from that generation, you know quite well. Sure, there were complaints, but they were on a scale of 1 to 10, probably -1 to what people set about to do, and did it always, because there was no net. You know about it. And I recall specifically one time when I was away living somewhere else, and somehow either I sold a drawing or something, and I had this money, and I immediately sent it home. And when I got back to visit, mother and father said they still had it in the envelope, and like to give it back to me. I said, no. I said, that's for those years. And I said, because still, you know, you're surviving and hopefully celebrating.
Boyd, which came first? Was it the drawing, the poetry, the music, or did it all kind of go together at the same time?
The written word first. I would write little things to mother, and make a card for her for an occasion, even when I was very small. And I can't remember not drawing, because that's my late older brother Eric was a great influence in many ways. He would take my hand, or we'd go over the hills, and he said, okay, he said, draw a tree, but I would try to draw all the trees. Not that there were many trees on the coast of Labrador. You had to go back a ways. These days there are, remarkably so. But I would try. He said, no. He said, first, draw one tree. He said, that's your forest. And so I can't remember not drawing. The guitar came much later, although there was music everywhere. Guitar players, fiddlers, accordion players, you know, the gambit, harmonica, as my father would play. But my late brother Eric was away, and I think it might have been Walvish Mines for work. And this package came in the mail one day, the second biggest package ever came to Lansinclair. He sent the biggest one, which was television. He was always ahead. First tape recorder, he was one of those. And it was a guitar, but it had nylon strings. It was Spanish, classical. So my buddies would make fun at me, call it half a guitar. But I couldn't strum it, and I would run after musicians to get them tune it for me. I would never strum it. I tried to do this, which went back to 1966.
The man you
the
saw.
fellow sitting on the grump, getting eaten by flies, and playing guitar. And he came back in subsequent years. He taught at the University of Chicago. He and his wife as well. He was a historian. I'm pretty certain she was a sociologist, not certain. And so by the time he didn't come back, I was starting to play a little bit. And he would still come to the house, and he would say, yeah, but, you know. So words came very, very early. Can't remember not drawing, and then the guitar at 14, which was a bit late.
So there were 12 in your family. I'm assuming that some of your siblings must have had artistic talent as well, or?
Well, Eric.
Yeah.
But a couple sisters would draw, like cowboys and stuff like that. Brother Enos, who's the youngest, he still plays. But so mother, church organist, and father, we would go to sleep and we'd hear harmonica, especially in the winter time, you know, when everyone was either in the house for 3 days because of a storm or just tired from gathering wood and whatever. So there were always musical sounds around. But that part of the coast, well, where do you go in our province without music?
Nowhere.
No, it's not possible.
It's everywhere.
I think of the Moravians, and I remember hearing the brass band from Hopedale the first time, and thinking back to the 1770s when the missionaries came, and eventually those instruments came, and trying to get in my head some kind of relevance of an Inuk with a tuba, of the imagery of the Inuit people, you know, traditional imagery of the hiak or the umak in your hand. And I remember saying to an itinerant minister one time who knew a bit about music and history and stuff like that, I said, this is an absolute revolution, but in what way? I said, who was revolutionized there? Was the Moravian missionaries or the Inuit people? But those sounds that came to Labrador and on the north coast changed a lot of things, brought possibilities, maybe some negative things, I would imagine as well. So the music from up Nain, well, certainly before then, of course, Hebron, Ocock, and how that came down true, and it's fascinating stuff. I remember the first time I was on the South Coast, just on a tour for the schools and the Canada Council, and so the three things I always had with me, because if I was stuck, I always had the guitar. And in Grey River, so at the time, there were 12 students. No one in grade 12, so you come down. So in the elementary grades were the bulk of them. So at the time, the music instruction was from Burgeo through online. So that day, the teacher was ill or something. And so the principal of the school, he said, well, everyone's free the next class, because he said there's no music. I said, well, I have my guitar. He said, would you mind? So I go into these little ones. And speaking of history of music, and you mentioned Johnny Cash earlier. So I played a couple things. First thing I played was Feuerlies, Beethoven. Da 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 da. Little fellow stood up. As the cat came back, sir. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, would you mind playing it again? Oh, that's the cat came back.
They had put lyrics to this?
No, it's Feuerlies, Beethoven's,
Okay.
for his woman friend. Mm-hmm. And so then the little one stood up, and it was twin brothers. They said, would you mind if we would sing Johnny Cash songs? Because that's gospel. Mm. So just by. So they sing Folsom Prison Blues. I said, okay. I said, can we try it again? So I had my guitar. The old Luther Perkins rhythm. And they were going, wow. And I'm thinking to myself, so these two boys, they're about 7 or so, right? They know all about music. They know everything they need to know. And here down in these places of very few people, there's music, there's poetry, there's drawing, young ones recording their music in Ramia School, and fascinating stuff. But I always think that they are experiencing the wonderment that I had, now in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Want to talk to you about your visual art.
Yes.
And I remember being in Labrador, Northwest River once, and seeing a triptych that you had created several years ago, I guess.
Yes.
Had a wonderful title. Was it Up in the North the Land is Singing, or something like that?
Away to the North.
Away to the North.
The landscape is singing.
The landscape is singing.
Yes.
Yeah, marvelous, marvelous title. But that piece really took my breath away. Would you describe it and kind of vocalize what you're saying in that piece?
That was a public commission, permanent piece for the Interpretation Centre in Northwest River. So myself, Gilbert Hay, the carver from Nain, had a piece, and Pat Nook from Chechi, he had a mural piece. Her Majesty unveiled the 3 pieces. Mm-hmm. That was 97. Took me 6 months. And we had a little apartment, and it was around the wall in the corner for 6 months, day and night. So when I was asked or considered, and the coordinator, he said, well, if you were to do this, because they wanted a drawing, what would the size be in it? This was at a meeting. I said, 3.5 feet by 18 feet. Didn't even think about it until after. And what would the content be? So I did up a little maquette, the usual. I said, this raven is a musician, a poet, and a carver of landscapes. And this raven will travel from Lancyclare up through Nain, up through Hebron and Ocock, up to Cape Chidley, which is the farthest point north, carrying news of this landscape, singing. And so companion to that, I wrote a verse which was translated into the Innu language, and Inuit languages. I was firm on that. And it talks about this landscape, what it is, what it's saying, how we will go, but it also records our passing and our passages. It witnesses everything that we do. It can see us. It can see us. And those who celebrate in return will be recognized. And that raven is part male, part female. I drew that raven. I've drawn ravens, and I continue to, and crows. But that raven, I basically drew with my eyes closed. The other thing about it is that seascape that's off what we call Square Cove, where there are many shipwrecks. There are still 2 tanks there. We call it the little bank there, where I would fish with my father and brothers. That's the other tangible part of it.
You've called your visual pieces visual poems.
Yes.
And having said that, it reminds me in a way of William Blake, who was also a visual artist and a poet. Do you consider yourself to be kind of in that same mold? Would it be fair to say you're in a sense a throwback to the Romantic era?
Well, I don't mind that. Certainly, to use a poor phrase, but it's true, I am a student of history, constantly, deeply. And looking through from hieroglyphs to Sanskrits, to the calligraphy that the Chinese invented, up through the Renaissance of not only Italy, of Germany and France, and up through the time of William Blake, and to our modern times in our place, this place. Without romance, there's no life. No.
Yeah.
Work can't be done. That's just me. But I know, and then, you know, the ultimate definition for me of romance is the ultimate balance of passion and reason. And that balance keeps it steady. And that's why with reason I use what you would call recognizable subjects and objects. The passion is out there combined in those visual poems. Like the work I'm at right now called Canticles, Hymns of Praise. So there are different kinds of funerals. I mean, the ritual of celebrating a life. So there's crows celebrating their dead while there are humans carrying caskets off, and it's a beautiful scene of the balance of passion and reason. And in another one, there's an elephant, because there was an elephant twice in St. John's with a traveling show. Barnum Bailey stripped down. And at the Arts and Culture Centre, I went to both shows because of Emmett Kelly Jr., the famous clown. And I saw this elephant coming out on stage and leaving the stage, and Emmett Kelly Jr. doing his thing, and I'm just there. And I remember an usher coming to me after the show and saying, you have to leave now. And I looked around. I was the only one there. Second show, same thing. So that was 1974. So 3 months ago, I finished the drawing with this elephant in it. It stayed in there. It's much like the late Squires and Job. It stayed with him from the time reading the Bible around the table with his brothers and mother until 2015 when he completed the work, The Legend of Job. It stays there. It keeps working and working.
You've drawn a lot of inspiration from the Bible as well. I mean, I picture there being one of those large Bibles in your home when you were growing up.
Oh, of course, yeah.
It truly is a wonderful piece of literature,
Oh, it's
isn't it?
it's singular.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up, church going. Well, mother the organist, father dressed corpses for 32 years. It was all around. But when you grow up and the house is in the land wash and the sea is coming and the storms are coming, if you don't read the Bible, because that's the bulwark, I mean, that's the breakwater, right? And then, of course, you read the Bible and you say, oh, that's where it all came from, sort of. But I continue to study it, probably with a clearer mind than I used to, in a way, because it's obviously it's inspired work. There's no question, but it was done through centuries and added on, whatever. But I look at for instance, Michelangelo, when he was at the Sistine Chapel ceiling. There's the Bible. So for that work, he was committed to 4.5 years. Started off with a crew, got rid of them, and laid on his back, reading and working and imagining. It's one of the true books of the world. Yeah.
Boyd, thanks so much for being on the program today.
Thank you.
It's been great seeing you again.
I appreciate it.
And that's it for this edition of our program. We'll see you again next time.
If you want convenience, Marie's Mini Mart is here for you. A one-stop shop for